One of the most important survival strategies humans have is trust.
Take school, for example. We all depend on teachers to fulfill their trust to the parents, all the boys and girls, to do a good job of teaching.
And teachers have to trust that the information they receive from historians, mathematicians, and scientists is accurate. When inevitably this trust is broken, it can give you this sense of confusion, especially when it comes from someone like a teacher. And this is what happened to our friend and fellow inquisitor Tiffany from Minnesota. To paraphrase, she asked, "Since when are there five
oceans? Growing up, we were taught there were 4. Suddenly, I'm so confused."
You know what? She's not wrong. Historically, we've been taught that there are only 4 oceans: the Atlantic, the Pacific, the Indian, and the Arctic. But it turns out that's not the case. The Southern Ocean, or the Antarctic Ocean, is the 5th ocean. Kind of. In the 1500s, Spanish explorer
Vasco Núñez de Balboa of Spain became the first European to see the eastern shore of the Pacific Ocean. Balboa actually christened his discovery the South Sea. It was round-the-world voyager Ferdinand Magellan who named it.
But it wasn't until over 400 years later, in 1928, that the International Hydrographic Organization, or IHO, recognized the region. Since then, the Southern Ocean has been on a sort of roller coaster ride. Some years it has its boundaries redefined, and some years, like 1953, its mention as an ocean has been completely omitted. In 2000, the IHO readdressed the question of the Southern Ocean. Of its 68 members, only 28 responded. All responding members, except Argentina, agreed to redefine the ocean, but within those votes, the members of the IHO couldn't unanimously agree on whether to call the region the Southern Ocean or the Antarctic Ocean. They also couldn't agree on the exact boundaries. Add to that other areas of concern by several countries relating to various naming issues around the world, primarily the Sea of Japan dispute.
From now on, books used by Virginia students will note that the Sea of Japan is also known as the EC, which is what Koreans call it.
And here we are in 2017, unsure of how many oceans there are. Is it 4 or is it 5? Well, technically, it's 1, the world ocean. The Earth has had one continuous ocean since the days of Pangea. What we call oceans are defined by arbitrary boundaries, as I talked about earlier. There's no definite point where the Pacific becomes the Atlantic, or when the Indian Ocean becomes the Arctic. They just sort of flow together. It's kind of like picking the exact moment you changed from a child to an adult. Now, this isn't the only thing we were taught in school that may turn out to be untrue. How many continents are there? 7, right? Maybe not.
To confirm the existence of a new continent. Writing in the Journal of the Geological Society of America, the group named the 8th continent Zealandia. 94% of it lies underwater, and Zealandia only pokes above the surface in New Zealand and New Caledonia.
All of this is a lot to take in. That trust you had for your 5th grade science teacher has been obliterated. There's 5 oceans now and 8 continents. What else are they hiding from us? Are there shape-shifting lizard people living among us? Is Tupac hiding in Cuba? I mean, we all know the government's trying to poison us with chemtrails and GMOs. What about the Earth? If you don't know how many continents there are or how many oceans there are, how do we know what shape it is? I mean, is the Earth flat?
No, God! No, God, please, no! No! No!
Wait, really? Way no, not even close. It couldn't be less flat. Thanks to rapper B.O.B, this question is kind of resurfaced after 400 years. And it seems he has a lot of people who are actually on board with the idea that the Earth is actually flat.
I am sick of all you round Earth believers saying that the Earth is not flat. I'm going to tell you why the Earth...
Now, to be fair, he didn't start this, but he has brought it back to light, so we have to address it. Most of the evidence that I've come across that's used to argue that the Earth is indeed flat is anecdotal and based on flawed logic. These theories either grossly oversimplify the complex conditions of the planet or outright ignore easily quantifiable facts. Things like the approximate number of stars in the sky or the circumference of the Earth are suddenly up for debate. Questions with an incorrect premise have to be answered before a meaningful discussion can be had. Assuming, of course, there is a meaningful discussion to be had.
Gravity is not a thing. Let's just take gravity and throw it out.
Questions like, why does water lay flat instead of flying all over the place? Why is it you never have to look down to see the horizon, no matter how high you rise? They argue that if Earth was really a sphere, you'd have to look down, which should actually prove that the Earth is round, because the location of that horizon changes the higher you are off the ground. So how do we know that it is round, other than scientists and photographs and even video from outer space? Well, you don't actually have to be a scientist to find out if the Earth is round. There's plenty of evidence all around us to demonstrate this. You can see the Earth's shadow on the moon. Speaking of shadows, your shadow changes depending on your location. Because the Earth is round, sunlight won't reach you in the same way from separate locations. Speaking of separate locations, when you stand on top of the Empire State Building, you can see a lot. Some estimates are as far out as 80 miles on a perfectly clear day. Most people say they can see somewhere between 30 to 50 miles. You know what you don't see? Chicago, Cleveland, or even Philly, at least not with the naked eye. And if the Earth were flat, that would be the case. But what if it was flat? To those of you who believe the Earth is flat, I have a question for you. What if your idea of flatness was actually based on the roundness of the Earth?
If you are small, as we are as humans, and that is the entirety of your, and that is the source of your understanding of the world in which you live, then of course the world looks flat.
What would you say to someone who said the Mona Lisa painting was actually just an off-white paint covering the entire canvas? That's what many of these arguments are like. It would be like looking at the Mona Lisa painting under a microscope, with the image focused entirely on a single area of the painting that is no larger than a grain of salt, then assuming the characteristics of that section can be extrapolated to cover the entire painting. Take a look at a small 1-foot board or a small shelf. When you use a level to confirm that the shelf is actually flat, you're actually confirming that it's round. If you connect 10 million of those boards end to end, even at nearly 2,000 miles long, it would still measure flat, even though it is curved constantly. When you use a spirit level or bubble level tool, the air bubble inside is constantly being pushed to the highest available point because gravity is pushing everything else to the lowest available point. This method of measurement can be used all around the world. The only way that this is possible is if there is a single center point of our planet. If the Earth was flat, we would feel a dramatic difference from city to city because their distance from the center of the Earth would change by thousands of miles in some places. See, the problem with the theory that the Earth is flat is that it can't stop at that point. It would change far too much about our understanding of this planet. It wouldn't just be a small revision in one page of the science books. Everything humans have figured out about the planet would be incorrect by a lot. It's safe to say that, at least on this planet, it's not possible for it to be flat. We can see many other planets from Earth. Venus, Mercury, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn can all be seen with the naked eye. Which has to make you wonder.
You know, if the Earth is flat, man, like, are the other planets flat?
Fine. Let's say you accept the fact that Earth is a sphere and the other planets in our solar system also lack a certain flatness. Surely out in the universe, there should be a planet whose general shape is flat over the typical sphere we're used to, right? Before we can even dive into that, we need to define what is considered a planet itself. If I'm ever having inner turmoil about life and its ups and downs, one of my favorite things to do is to go outside on a clear night, look up and slowly scan the stars, taking in the vastness of our galaxy, the space in between everything, and how little my problems are in the grand scheme of things. I breathe in cosmic background radiation, atoms of everything that has existed and will exist once again, and start to focus in on a select few sparkles in that night sky. Each of these are stars with their own set of planets and their own set of problems. They're countless, and if you start to count them, you'll quickly lose track. This has a calming effect for me and grounds me to tackle life on the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known. If you give this a try and scan these stars, keep in mind they're solar systems, and although very different from our own in all likelihood, they still follow the same 3 to 4 principles in defining its celestial inhabitants known as planets. Those principles are: 1. They orbit a sun or suns. Yes, that's plural you heard. In our galaxy, a third of the identified solar systems are binary, meaning 2 stars. The remaining 2/3 are largely single star systems. 2. Has sufficient mass to be round or nearly round. We could stop here. If you don't have enough mass, you'll be oddly shaped like asteroids and moons, but nowhere near flat. 3. Is not a satellite or moon of another object. This is why I was being flaky earlier about saying 3 to 4 principles. I personally think we can do without it because in the grand scheme of things, all celestial bodies in the universe orbit each other or other objects. So from this point on, I won't even use this rule because gravity is attracting us to each other, which will always lead to some sort of orbit. 4. Lastly, the potential planet must have removed debris and small objects from the area around its orbit. This one's a kicker, and we'll get back to it in just a moment. The Milky Way. That's our galaxy in case you've missed that somehow. It's the home to 100 billion planets. Could any of those maybe be flat? Pay attention. Rule number 2 specifically says you gotta have enough mass and be round. You're probably thinking, aha, so there are celestial bodies that could be flat but aren't called planets. Therefore, Earth could be flat. Well, for one, stop grouping your questions in a way that makes a yes and no answer both right and wrong at the same time. And 2, for the first part of your question, yes, there are flat celestial bodies, but you're not gonna like the specific answer.
Downgraded Pluto. Beginning of the Hidden Planetarium, I didn't know what we were dealing with. Some kind of galactic despot. Just go in there willy-nilly and, oh, Pluto, you're not a planet anymore. And Jupiter, now we're going to refer to you as Steve.
You know, scientists thought Pluto was a planet and they were wrong about that, so they could be wrong about Earth. Stop cherry-picking what to believe in order to put your false claims ahead. There are 3 defining principles, and Pluto failed one of those after closer observation. Let's get into it. Also, has anyone realized that I've been arguing with myself for the last couple minutes? I might be losing it, guys. My favorite aspect of science is that when it is presented with new substantial, verified evidence, it is inherently capable of adopting new rules and understanding. The scientific method was created specifically so it can be retested and verified or denied. Scientists weren't necessarily wrong about Pluto, but instead misunderstood their observation on February 18th, 1930. Pluto was largely demoted due to the fact of where it lives in the Kuiper Belt, along with a trillion other objects. Nearly all those things are made of ice chunks similar to Pluto. It just so happens we saw Pluto first. Ironically, it isn't even the biggest thing in the Kuiper Belt. Aries currently reigns king of the Kuiper Belt, coming in at 25% larger by mass and twice as far as Pluto. Other notable large objects in the region exist, like Haumea, Makemake, even Ceres, although this is actually a bit closer in our asteroid belt. That separates the rocky planets from the gas giants. So you see, if we're to keep Pluto as a planet, all these other items would also have to be considered planets, along with the other 100 suspected objects in our own solar system. I'm not sure how you guys learned your planets, but I learned it by a song. I imagine a song with 100 objects may be counterproductive. So you see, Pluto fails clearly in one of the principles, which is clearing the majority of everything within its orbital path, as it only takes up 0.07 times the mass of everything that Pluto orbits.
Other icy bodies in the outer solar system. Pluto, dwarf planet, there you go. So you just get over that.
I'm not sure if that's PC though. And as a little homage, all dwarf planets beyond Neptune are now considered Plutoids. That's not so bad, right? So here's the specific answer I mentioned earlier you wouldn't like. No, the Earth isn't flat. It's an oblate spheroid, which is nearly a perfect sphere, but instead it is flattened at its poles and elongated at the equator. Here's where a flat earther might get excited because it should be cluing you into possibility of a flat planet. Allow me to crush your dreams. Yes, a planet in theory could be flat. It requires something that our planet does and lots of it, specifically spin. We spin 360 degrees in 24 hours. People at the equator are actually spinning 1,000 miles per hour faster than a person at the poles. The closest to a flat world is a neighbor to Pluto in the Kuiper Belt. Mentioned earlier, Haumea has an equatorial diameter along its long axis, that is twice as large as its shortest axis at a 2-to-1 ratio, essentially making it a triaxial ellipsoid shape. We believe an impact with another celestial body likely caused Haumea spin and would be similar to what would need to happen to another world to start to flatten out. Spin isn't the only thing. You also need centrifugal force to overcome its own gravitational attraction. So equatorial particles have the ability to escape the planetary body, and this is what physics limits. For example, Earth would achieve maximum flattening potential at a ratio of 3-to-1. Any more in parts of Earth would escape our own gravitational pulls, making Earth as leaky as a 50-year-old man with an enlarging prostate. So the more dense a planet is, the higher the flattening ratio potential is. For example, a planet made of mostly uranium has a 5-to-1 flattening ratio. One final blow to your flat planet theory. The faster you spin, the flatter you get. But the flatter you get, the more difficult it is to maintain your wholeness before spewing all the matter of your world into space. The planet's internal forces would create friction and act against the outer layer's rotation. It would be one lonely, desolate planet with barely any atmosphere at all. So if you believe in the flat earth theory, this sounds like the perfect home for you and your nonsense.
There's a growing anti-intellectual strain in this country that may be the beginning of the end of our informed democracy. Of course, in a free society, you can and should think whatever you want. And if you want to think the world is flat, go right ahead. But if you think the world is flat and you have influence over others, as would successful rappers, then being wrong becomes being harmful to the health, the wealth, and the security of our citizenry. Discovery and exploration got us out of the caves, and each generation benefits from what previous generations have learned. Isaac Newton, my man, said, "If I have seen farther than others, it's by standing on the shoulders of giants." I get an amen. Woo! So that's right, B.O.B. When you stand on the shoulders of those who came before, you might just see far enough to realize the earth isn't flat.
We want to thank you guys for listening to this week's episode. Please rate and subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and all other major podcasting apps. It really goes a long way in helping others find our show. Follow @MyDumbQuestion on Facebook, Twitch TV, and Beam to join us live as we premiere our newest episode every Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern. It's really a fun way for us to interact with you guys. And to quote Carl Sagan, there are naive questions, tedious questions, ill-phrased questions, questions put after inadequate self-criticism. But every question is a cry to understand the world. There's no such thing as a dumb question.